Listen, Ken, I knew we were going to have some stuff to talk about with training camp going on, but quite the morning. Did this catch you off guard, that this was announced and the way and when it was announced? I mean, what was your first reaction when you saw the tweet from the Jets PR today announcing what we were going to be talking about with Rick Bowness and Blake Wheeler?
Seeing is believing, Huss, I would say, in this situation. I had told you before on this program during the course of the summer that if Blake Wheeler was not going to be the captain, probably the only way that I saw that happening was if Blake Wheeler decided he no longer wanted to carry the burden of being the captain. And he did admit in my question to him that it had become a burden for him. But make no mistake, this was not Blake Wheeler walking into Rick Bowness's office saying, "I'd like to hand in the C for you to put on someone else." This was a coaching staff decision. And I think if you were waiting for a "there's a new sheriff in town" moment, Huss, I would say that's what I saw when I saw the press release come out. I think that Rick said a lot of complimentary things about Blake, and as you mentioned before the break, Blake will still be a very important part of the team. But no matter how anyone is going to spin it, I mean, I think the Jets felt it was time to have new voices in the leadership group, and I think they felt that, by having Blake be removed as the captain, there would be a little bit more oxygen in the room for some of those young leaders to spread their proverbial wings and do a little bit more leading. So, I was surprised at the timing, but I think the timing is very simple for me, Huss. I mean, and I think Blake would have been part of this part of it. The reason that Blake would have said, "I want to speak today," is he didn't want this to be hanging over the Jets when training camp begins. So instead of having the conversation next Thursday and people being surprised next Thursday, I think the Jets got ahead of it. And I think Blake got ahead of himself in saying that, this is how he handled himself. This is how he's had time to process. But make no mistake, Huss. I mean, this is something that would have been something that caused some emotional strain to Blake Wheeler. I mean, he was not anticipating this happening, and I think he would have been hurt by it, quite frankly. And that's one thing we know about Blake, is that he's an emotional guy, but he's dealt with that emotion, and now he's ready to move on and do his part to kind of help out wherever he can. But it was an interesting morning for sure. I thought Blake handled himself with a lot of class, in a tough situation. And I think Rick, although he didn't really want to attack a lot of the specifics, I think that he was as complimentary as he could be, while also, if you read between the lines, I think it was quite apparent that his message would be put through other voices this year coming up, or through more other voices. But again, I don't think that Blake is going to be, I said this to you, I think a week or two ago, Huss, Blake's not going to be hanging his bottom lip anytime soon. He's going to be showing up and playing hard as he always does.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. And we'll get back to Wheeler and his situation going forward into training camp in a minute. But I do sort of want to go back to Bowness because it was very interesting to hear, Rick being, and I like the way you put it. This was the new sheriff in town moment in a lot of ways. And he's just got here. So it's not like he's had the time to get together. I know he's had conversations with so many players. But I would imagine that this was something that Kevin Cheveldayoff was quite involved in, and other members of the organization, because, I mean, speaking of reading the tea leaves or reading the room, I mean, I think a lot of this goes back to the exit interviews with every one of those players at the end of last season. And then, of course, everything that we'd heard all season, that both the Jets and Blake Wheeler were working on potentially a new address, shall we say, some sort of a trade. So, I mean, once that happens, I think it was quite clear that the potential of this was certainly there. And to be honest, I don't know how you come back without making some sort of a change, considering what we heard and what we knew that the team and Blake spoke to today considered making happen. It was time for this to happen, and maybe overdue.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure about the overdue part, but I think that it's important for both sides of the equation here, Huss. I think that I actually appreciate Blake's honesty here. Let's be honest, Huss. I mean, I was fully anticipating Blake Wheeler to say that's none of your business when Scott Billick asked him about the speculation about him being on the move. And that would not have surprised you or I if that had been his reaction. The fact that Blake was a little bit more open in terms of sharing his thoughts on that matter, I thought was important. I mean, Blake also made it abundantly clear that he was committed to the Jets, but I think the other part of that too, Blake also said he knows being moved is a possibility. He said it's not up to me. He said he was committed to being here, but it's not up to me. And to me, that says if I'm not here, it will be because the Jets chose to move me, not because I asked to be moved. But
it also said to me that he would be open to that and still is open to that. That's the way I took it.
That's not how I interpreted it all, Huss. I think that to me is that he was open to it in the summer, but after conversations, I don't know if those conversations just included Rick Bowness or Kevin Cheveldayoff or Mark Scheifele or whoever else Blake was speaking to. I believe that he has come to the conclusion that he's okay with the decision that was made, even though he probably doesn't like it. And let's be honest, nobody would like that to happen to them if they had been in that situation. But we know what's happened before to guys like Dustin Brown and guys like Joe Thornton, and I think even Patrick Marleau. So, I mean, guys can still be important members of the team when they're not in that captaincy role anymore. And those two teams also had some success with changes in leadership. But yeah, for me, Blake was pretty open. I mean, Huss, we talk about this all the time. I mean, you do need the decoder at times with Blake. He is emotional, but he doesn't always give you the whole picture. But if you've been around him enough, you know where he's coming from. I thought he was very open in terms of showing how raw the emotion was in terms of dealing with this, but also his ability to put that in the rearview mirror and focus on his job. But I mean, this is a very proud individual. So when Blake Wheeler says, yeah, the goal is to be better than last season, but then he drops a, yeah, we'll see. That, yeah, we'll see is directed at every single person on social media that said the reason the Jets missed the playoffs is because Blake Wheeler didn't do a good enough job leading. So he's not comfortable. He's fine accepting responsibility, but he's not willing to say, oh, you think the Jets are just going to make the playoffs because I'm not the captain? Well, you got another thing coming. He doesn't come right out and say that, but I think that if you're looking at the undertones, I think Blake is willing to say, hey, if you just think that it was one single issue that had our team sunk last year, you're sadly mistaken. But at the same time, I mean, he is not, he's fully comfortable accepting responsibility. And he said it flat out. I've had to work on my leadership style, but he also dropped I continued to work on my leadership style this summer, even though we don't know exactly when this conversation with Rick Bowness happened. Blake is still planning on being whether it's a vocal voice or a guy who leads by example. He's not just going to sit in the weeds and see where things go. I mean, this is a guy who works extremely hard and he wants the team to succeed. I mean, if we've had a lot of conversations about guys who want to be out of town, Blake to me didn't sound like a guy who wanted to be on the first plane out of town, and he could have been out of town, as he openly admitted. So it'll be super interesting when camp starts. I mean, what's the vibe going to be like? Who are those guys that are going to be wearing letters when preseason games begin? I mean, you heard I asked Rick Bowness, how many there would be, who would be in the conversation, would you go home and road? All of those things are potential options. But he certainly wasn't shedding a lot of light on who those guys were going to be. But I think we have a pretty good idea who would be in that leadership group and who's ready to take on a little bit more.
All right, Ken Wiebes with us from Sportsnet and, of course, KNR. And, wow, we've got well over 600 people here, folks. Hit the red subscribe button if you have not already. Help the boys out and join us on the reg. We're here every day, 1 o'clock Central, live. But the great thing about the free subscription on YouTube, if you're not able to join us live, hit us up. You'll have the freshest Winnipeg sports talk content every day, and subscribing helps us grow the channel as well. And while you're at it, hit that thumbs up. And thanks to everyone that's already done that. Ken, just back to that, and I'm not going to totally disagree with you, but I will say this, especially considering Blake Wheeler's contract status, where there's a limited number of teams that, he can be traded to now that it's past, I believe it's 5. I sort of took that as, well, hey, it didn't happen. Like, I think it didn't happen because they weren't able to do it. I don't think that there's been a big epiphany going, oh, you know what, we were thinking maybe we were going to do that, but now we're going in a different direction. And, from Blake's side of things, this is why it makes it difficult coming back, and why I think it was certainly the right way to get ahead of this right now, is that That was the big talk of the conversation. You have a new coach that comes in, and for the first day of training camp, he's no longer the captain. It's pretty clear that it's a very, very different situation for Blake right now as a member of the Winnipeg Jets than it has been at any point since they put that letter on him in the absence of after the Andrew Ladd trade.
Yeah, but we knew that was going to happen because of the coaching change, right? I mean, as soon as Paul Maurice was gone, Blake's situation changed. So, and the other part that you and I have discussed frequently over the course of the summer was what the role would look like. I mean, under Rick Bowness. So we're expecting to be a reduction of minutes. It's not going to be a drastic reduction of minutes, but there will be a reduction of minutes that comes with the roles and responsibilities where Nikolai Ehlers will be grabbing more of the first line right wing minutes. So we expect that to happen as well. Maybe it's an easier thing to do when Blake is not the captain, would be my counter to that point, Huss. But yeah, I mean, to me, I'm with you. There was like at one point in that 9:45, Huss, I was thinking there was a little bit of a nostalgic view that was being expressed by Blake. He mentioned the 11 years, but to me, the overarching view was of somebody who wants to still win. He takes a lot of pride in wearing the Jets jersey. And I don't think this is a guy who's going to be putting his house up for sale. I think this is a guy who is still proud to raise his family in Winnipeg, and he wants to see this team succeed. So to me, if Blake wanted to be traded, Huss, I don't think we see Blake Wheeler out in front of the media today, whether the Jets wanted to get in front of it or not. I think if Blake has already decided that it was time to go, he wouldn't bother speaking. I mean, that's just the way that I outright feel. I don't think the Jets made him speak. I think Blake made it clear that he doesn't plan on talking to the media a whole lot this year. But I do think it was important for him to show how he was going to respond, especially when Rick Bowness said that's a conversation between Blake and myself, and I don't plan on sharing the contents of the conversation. And no surprise that Blake quickly countered with, that's something that will stay between me and Rick.
Hold on a sec. Can you imagine if that happened, if the Jets made this announcement today and Rick Bowness spoke to it, and then Wheeler didn't talk?
Well, no,
I mean, that would have made it. That would have been a terrible situation for him,
right? But if he was saying, I'm done with the Jets because this has happened, and I'm upset about losing the captaincy, and I want to be out of here, where's the incentive for him to get out in the open and speak about it? That's why I say, Huss. I think
because
honestly,
he's not going anywhere because they haven't been able to trade him.
Well, I mean, that's fine for you. I just don't agree that would be the reason. I think that he wanted to get this out of the way. And I don't think Blake is the kind of,
I agree with you on that. And I think it was the most logical and it was the best move for all parties involved to do it the way they did this year. Right.
I just don't think that Blake is waiting. This is not a Patrick Laine situation. Blake's not waiting for his phone to ring and say, where am I going next? I mean,
if it happened, it was going to happen already. No, exactly. And that's what I mean. They're in it together moving forward. I mean, I guess, listen, 2 years is a long time. Things can change, and maybe, with less time left on the contract, we'll see what happens. I think everything is up in the air. The bottom line is Wheeler is going to be in this lineup and an important player on this team, regardless of where he stands amongst the quote unquote leadership group. But just as a player and as a teammate, as a member of this group, considering what's happened today, where do you think that leaves Blake?
I think it leaves Blake where Blake is going to be. I mean, Blake's going to be a top 6 forward on the Winnipeg Jets until there's somebody better to be used ahead of him. Blake's a guy who's not, I don't think he's a rah guy in the room. I think he speaks when he feels it's necessary. And I think he'll continue to speak when it's necessary. Whether that means doing it less frequently, that I can't know us. I'm not in the room assessing when the conversations are happening. But what we know from other guys when they speak about it, Blake's not a guy that makes a whole lot of speeches. He said it himself, and his teammates have also said it. But I mean, Blake knows how a team should run, and he knows when things are going well. Will there be an adjustment period, and could there be a little awkwardness in, are there going to be times where Blake bites his tongue? I mean, I just don't see Blake as that kind of person who's going to be biting his tongue. If something needs to be said, he's going to say it. I mean, that's the way he's kind of been raised as a player. So,
well, let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase it. Can this be a good thing for Wheeler? Because I think that I mean, you asked him about, or I believe it was you that asked him
it was
about,
me.
as the burden at some point? Absolutely. If he knows he's going to be here, and the bottom line is, if everyone around him is having a little bit more fun, is a little bit more engaged, feels more a part of the team, his role might be a little different. But I really do think that if the atmosphere around the team is better, if the team itself does better, I think that's going to be, I think we might see a Blake Wheeler at times next year that is looks and plays like there is a bit of a weight off his shoulders. And to be honest, Ken, the way this team, I mean, there hasn't been many significant changes up front. The Winnipeg Jets need the best possible Blake Wheeler this year. And for anyone that thinks he's going to go down to a very secondary role, you're not reading the depth chart very well. They need Wheeler to be a big part of this team going forward. And I think that doing this early, getting through camp, having some time for everything to settle, by the time we get to the start of the season, this won't be a huge topic. We'll have probably talked about it enough. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being something that is kind of liberating for Blake.
Yeah, it's a good point, Huston. I was wondering that same thing as, before going into the conversation, then during. And at one point, I actually was wondering about asking him about that. But his answer to my question about the burden gave us the answer.
Yeah.
Yes, it had been bothering him. And it had been something that was wearing on him and stressing him out. And I do agree with you to a degree. I don't think it impeded his level of play by any stretch of the imagination, but I do feel like there can be a weight lifted off Blake's shoulders, and he can not have to worry about, putting his arm around a young player. I think he'll still give the guy a tap on the shin pads, but in terms of how he needs to act around players, or, maybe his wording and conversations, I think this is great for Blake in that he can just go out and play hockey. I mean, you know what Blake Wheeler enjoys doing, Huss? Playing hockey. And you know what we haven't seen from Blake Wheeler in the last 2 or 3 years? We haven't seen Blake enjoying hockey nearly enough. We've talked about that a lot. You saw some of that joy around his 1,000th game, Huss, but for the most part, Blake hasn't had a big smile on his face. And again, this is not a guy would be under the happy-go-lucky category in terms of how he carries himself. He's a guy that has his game face on, I would say, almost 24/7, but that's okay. That works for him. But I do think that his joy level, to borrow the Claude Noel phrase, I think his joy level is going to be higher. I think he's going to enjoy the game more. We joke about it, whatever the responsibility of speaking to the media. Blake is an incredibly articulate person when he chooses to be. He also sometimes feels like a lot of his interviews feel like an interrogation to him in terms of how the reaction and the responses can be. So Blake's a super smart guy. I think fans and even media will not be better off not hearing from Blake Wheeler as often. But do I think it will help him feel better about his own game? I mean, I don't think he was impacted by having to talk to the media. And let's not kid ourselves, those number of appearances dropped during COVID because the room wasn't open. Blake's a guy that spoke to the media basically every single day after he became captain until the rooms closed. So did that become a nuisance? Sure. But the biggest thing for Blake is how he plays. And everyone's been talking about Father Time. When is Father Time going to catch up to Blake? I still think that Blake is going to be a productive player for the Winnipeg Jets. And, whether if he felt bad initially about having the C removed, I do think, back to your original premise, that he will feel like a bit of a weight has been lifted. And I do think it could potentially help him play a better game, for lack of a better term. And that's not to, we never question the effort. I think he will be able to take a deep breath and just go out and do what he likes doing best, which is being an NHL player.
Well, you know what, 100%. And, back to your point of Blake, not really seem to enjoy things very much over the last few years. And I certainly got that as well. I think that was a real problem for the team because under Paul Maurice, and even I think for the most part, although that may have changed somewhat during Dave Lowry, I mean, he was the tone setter for this team. And if that's the tone for everyone else, sometimes, and Rick Bowness sort of got to this, Ken, he doesn't want guys to dread coming to practice, to doing videos. I mean, he wants to build a team, and they've talked a lot about how close-knit this group is. Well, you want a group that actually is that loves being together and that is enjoying themselves. And listen, part of it was the results last year, but I think also part of it was the tone that was set by Blake. And you know what? Even Blake himself, I think if that tone changes and the atmosphere is a little different, I think that might bring out a guy that enjoys being a Winnipeg Jet and being part of this a little bit more, even though it might be a bit of a blow to the pride today, having to have this conversation and know for the first time in whatever it is, 5 or 6 years, there won't be a C on his chest.
Yeah, fair. And I would just quickly say this. I mean, people that are just blaming Blake for the Jets' lack of results last year, I don't think that's a fair, and you're not saying that,
that's
but
crazy.
Some people are. I don't think that's a fair assessment, but I do think that his joy level has dropped in the last couple of years. And naturally, when you're not having the same level of success as a team, it's going to drop.
I thought that happened for everyone, no?
Oh, agreed completely. But yeah, I think what you're getting at, Huss, is this. The Jets have a team with a bunch of players with big personalities. And what we remember about Blake is that one of the most things he was thankful about, not today where he expressed gratitude for never dreaming of becoming an NHL captain, in leading up to his 1000th game, he was so happy about the ability the Jets gave him to be himself. I think the Jets have a bunch of players that felt maybe they couldn't necessarily be their fully outgoing selves when Blake was the captain and he was setting that serious tone. So I agree with you, and I agree with Rick Bowness. The Jets need to get back to being a team that has fun. And obviously, winning makes it the most fun. But let's go back to 2018, Hudson. I know people hate doing that. The Jets had a lot of fun in 2018. They had guys like Buff that are having a good time around the rink, but they needed that balance between the seriousness and the fun. But they got to get back to that. I think that, they got a little bit too serious at times. They need to have a little bit more fun. But ultimately, Huss, winning makes hockey fun. So again, I don't think it's fair to say that it was only Blake Wheeler setting the tone, but of course the captain sets the tone. That's part of the job and the responsibility. And I do agree ultimately that Blake will enjoy the game more when he's not having to deal with some of the other responsibilities that come with being a captain. But that also doesn't mean that he's just going to ignore, all the other important things that got him named captain in the first place, most of which come by leading by example. And that is something that I expect he'll continue to do, no matter the fact that he's playing as a 36-year-old veteran forward with, some tread on the tires. But I think Blake still has a lot to give. I think he will give everything that he has.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, winning is fun. And they did a hell of a lot of winning in 17-18, and they did a lot of winning in the first half of 2018-19, and then the second half of that season, followed by a first-round playoff exit. That's when, the end of that season, that group being around them was as miserable for a good team as I think we've seen in a really long time. And, then the last 2 years, it's really hard to, I think, quantify it's the effects of everything else, COVID, just the way things went. But I'll say this, and disagree with me if you would like. Paul Maurice said as much, that he doesn't go around the dressing room very much. He said, this is his guy. It's his room. It's their room of that group. And that's sort of why I think that when things haven't been going bad, and that was a guy that is just so intense and driven, and very different from some of the other players. We heard him refer to things as a young team. I mean, there were some very different personalities in that room, and he was the guy. And I think that, this opportunity will give other players a chance to maybe get into that role and become more of a team. As far as that goes, who benefits from this the most? I mean, who are the guys in your mind that are ready and will take a bigger role, whether they're officially part of that leadership group at some point or just part of playing a bigger role and a bigger part of being the voices of the Winnipeg Jets and the empowerment as to how that might help them?
Yeah, for me, Huss, it was already happening last year. I mean, we saw, Kyle Connor speaking more. I mean, Kyle is a very reserved individual. He, doesn't seek the spotlight ever. But I thought after some tough losses, Kyle Connor was very forthcoming last year, for lack of a better term. And it's not just Wheeler, Huss. I mean, Blake Wheeler will still be there, but Paul Stastny carried a big leadership burden. Andrew Kopp was a big part of the leadership group, even though he didn't wear a letter. So it's not just replacing Blake Wheeler's voice. It's having other young guys step into the role. I mean, Pierre-Luc Dubois is an interesting one because he took on a lot of leadership responsibilities last year. I don't see him necessarily wearing a letter this year because of the uncertainty about his future. But I do see guys like Nikolai Ehlers and Adam Lowry and Kyle Connor being guys that could be letters. Connor's an interesting one to me because he doesn't seek the spotlight, he won't necessarily wear a letter, but he definitely will be in the conversation for one. But I think he was already growing into that role last year in terms of what he was sharing publicly. Nikolai Ehlers was a guy you always saw after tough losses, often speaking from the heart. I think Brendan Dillon would fall into the category, Huss, that he could wear a letter easily. But to me, Brendan Dillon is one of those guys that Rick Bowness referred to today as a guy who doesn't need a letter to lead. So I'm not sure if he's going to wear one or not. He would be someone that would be under the conversation as well.
Hey,
those are the guys that stand out to me.
Let me ask you, what about Mark Scheifele? Like, if you'd asked me this at the end of last season, I would have said, hell no. I would have even been surprised that he was on this team. Things have changed. We're certainly hearing a different Mark, or a Mark that we remember from a few seasons ago. But he was always part of that group. They're talking about change. There certainly is uncertainty as to what happens with him in 2 years or maybe before. Where's Scheifele in all this?
Yeah, I've said this to you before, Huss. I think Mark wants us to be his team. I think he shared some things within 32 Thoughts with Elliot and Jeff earlier this afternoon, and my colleague Luke Fox has written about it. He didn't go after he was told by Bowness. He wasn't going in saying, "Hey, I want to be the captain" or anything of that nature. But I think down the road, I think Mark would be open to becoming the captain. I think you will see him still wear a letter. I think it's important for the Jets to show that they are firmly in Mark Scheifele's camp. I think we've talked about this a lot, about the attitude. I wouldn't even say attitude change. It's the return to the guy who loves hockey that we've seen this summer. I think that showing that you are fully under, having Mark Scheifele as a guy you're going to count on, Huss, I think that's the best way to get the best version of Mark Scheifele. And I know a lot of people are saying, strip everybody of their letters. I mean, I just don't think that that's necessary. I think that once the captaincy has been removed from Blake Wheeler, you got the team's attention. You don't need to say, you know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to send a message to Mark Scheifele. I'm going to strip him of his letter and see if he likes it or not. And again, I'm not saying this was done to send a message to Blake Wheeler, but you are definitely sending a message to the team that there's a new person in charge behind the bench by changing your leadership core to going to 4 alternates or whatever the number ends up being. I just don't see a lot of value in saying, Rick Bowness said today again, and you were there, Huss, last year was last year. No one's going to erase last year, and no one's going to erase the video highlights or lowlights. But what I've seen from Mark Scheifele this year would not suggest to me that he is a guy who needs his letter stripped off of his jersey. Ultimately, it's going to be up to him to show that once the season starts. But to me, Mark is someone who wants to have a strong voice in the room. He wants to be part of the leadership group. And, based on what we've seen this summer, I think he deserves to keep his letter. Now, if all of a sudden you're not seeing any effort when the year starts, now you're having a different conversation.
Well, yeah.
And
what have we seen this summer?
That happening.
What have we seen this summer? He did an interview with Sarah before he played a golf tournament.
Plus, we spoke with him at the Southwood that day also. He's done several other things where the happy-go-lucky Mark is back.
I want that so much to be the case. He made it clear that he wants
to be better, Huss. He's made it very clear. I mean, ultimately, the proof is in the pudding, as a Mr. Fuji used to say on wrestling when we used to enjoy wrestling.
When we used to, come on.
Oh, we still enjoy it, yes. It's just a different time. It's up to Mark. But to me, Huss, I mean, again, I understand some people are out there shouting from the rooftops, strip the letter off of him. I mean, what are you trying to accomplish by doing that? You're not helping him feel better about himself. You're not helping his
He's too
value.
important to the team, to be honest. I mean, it would be a risk
so
that I'm not sure.
what are you trying to accomplish by doing it? I don't see any value whatsoever, and nor do I see the Jets. If that decision was being made, Huss, I think it would have been in the press release that we saw today. So to me, A, I don't think they need to do it, and B, I think it would be far too the consequences far outweigh the potential benefits that you're trying to like. I mean, if this was the 80s or the 90s, by all means, but Mark Scheifele doesn't need a fire lit under him, Huss. He has made it clear he was not happy about last year. He doesn't want a repeat performance, and he knows what he has to improve upon in order to avoid that repeat performance. So to me, I don't think you're sending any message whatsoever. But if the behavior doesn't change, I don't think you'll be seeing him wearing a letter for long. Rick's already got a built-in excuse. You've got a cast of rotating characters.
Yeah.
But let me go back to what I just said before. I think there's a much better chance that Mark Scheifele ultimately becomes captain of the Jets than he would be stripped of an A at this point. Again, and I'm not saying Mark will be a captain this year. It would probably have to include another contract with the Jets. But I think it's far more likely that Mark ends up being a captain of the Jets than him losing his C or A or having it stripped off of his jersey.
Yeah, no, listen, I'm with you, and I think that's right. But I think the reasons for that is that, especially with the Dubois situation, they need Mark Scheifele to be the best Mark Scheifele, and they need him to be. There's no one, I think, that can impact a turnaround more than Mark Scheifele being the best version of himself. But we know that wasn't the case last year. And I guess the reason why I bring this up is that, it's very easy to put this all on Blake Wheeler as the captain. And he was the guy that had to go out and talk today. And he's the one that's sort of, bearing the brunt of this right now. But I mean, let's face it. I mean, this was Scheifele and Wheeler for a long, long time. And Mark, for all the things that we're talking about with Blake, we were saying the same things about Mark for most of last season. So I guess it's just important from my perspective that this is not all hung on Blake and you think that we're going to make this happen and then everything's great. There's a lot of guys that need to step it up, and there's no one more important than 55 in my book.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it flat out on this interview several times already. This is not a Blake Wheeler issue. The Jets had some, things that they needed to get cleaned up, and we'll see if they've got them cleaned up. I mean, ultimately, it's up to them. I see signs from Mark Scheifele that he wants to be part of the solution. I think he has acknowledged that he was part of the problem, but this is not a one or two player thing. I mean, you don't just miss the playoffs because one or two players don't live up to their expectation level. I mean, this team had a bunch of players have career years, but they had a bunch of guys who didn't play well enough, and they didn't play well enough collectively, which was ultimately where they were at. Rick, again, hinted at it. We heard earlier in the week before the young stars about how they want to play a different system, be more aggressive.